The Basic Education Department has decided to add 5% to the marks of the grade 4 to 9 2020 final exams. They say this is in response to the negative effects to the school year by COVID-19. Joining me now to talk about this is SADTU's General Secretary Mugwena Maluleke, as well as NAPTOSA's Executive Director Basil Manuel. Gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for joining us on the news feed late night. I'll start with a question for both of you. Mugwena, I'll start with you. Should students be given extra marks to assist them to pass the 2020 year?
Madam Dole, good evening, and good evening to your viewers at home, and thanks for having us, and good evening to Basil. Look, the question is not just a straightforward answer, because we know that what the pandemic has done, it has really affected the teachers and the learners, and therefore adjusting of marks is not the new thing in education system globally, to adjust the marks in order to compensate for the time that has been lost, but also to take into account what was supposed to have been achieved within the time that we couldn't have. So basically an adjustment, because we as the unions had submitted that we needed to have an overlap in 2021, 2022 over 3 years, so that we then have to deal with those particular concepts and competencies that our learners would have not covered. However, the department came with a proposal of adding the 5% instead of not considering the issue of not writing exam, but write exam, but obviously adjust those particular marks by 5%. And therefore, we feel that it is something that is acceptable in any standard. However, our wish would have been that we do other things in terms of school-based assessment, and not really only looking at the summative examination as a way of promotion, because we are supposed to take into account environmental factors, psychological factors, as well as the social problems that the learners have been experiencing.
Basil, I mean, do you think that students should be awarded their extra marks? It's been a tough year, very stressful year for them. Do they need this kind of support and this kind of assurance?
Absolutely, but let us put it into context. It's not every child that will get 5%. It's an adjustment when we see that a child is really at the point of passing, but is just falling short. And of course, this is because children have been affected differently. The stress levels that children have had, of course, the differences between our children and where they come from, and the poverty levels have been highlighted by COVID-19. So one should expect that there must be some compensation in terms of assisting learners. We also know that the amount of work learners has done has differed from school to school, because the schools have also been affected differently. But it's an international standard, as Mugwena says. It's nothing new. We've always had it in the system. Up to now, it was at 2%. Now it has gone up to 5%, simply just because of the unusual nature of the year. We must remember that the year has been different. It has been difficult, and our children have suffered much more than we realize.
Does it not place top achieving students at a disadvantage? They have applied themselves, they've worked hard. Others are arguing that, well, I mean, if you are going to give a 5%, give a 5% across board.
Adjustments don't work like that. Even if you look at the standardization of a matric examination, they are graded according to various levels, etc. And of course, we must also understand that depending on the type of work covered, that gives certain children an advantage above others. So no, it doesn't. Remember that your child who is marginal today may not be marginal all the time, but their circumstances may have created greater differences. And so the 5% is not so great that it is going to make a child right at the bottom surpass the child who is at the top. But we must also understand that children have been affected differently, and hence we need to look at those kids that have really been impacted. Besides, over and above all that, the system cannot have a large number of children repeating a year simply because the system cannot afford to do that. Already Gauteng is telling us there are 42,000 children not accommodated. Imagine what would happen if you have mass failure. But is failure good for children? The answer is no.
Now, those who are concerned, Mugwena, about this policy are talking about class sizes in particular and the unpreparedness to then take in this huge number of learners that would, I suppose, then get over the threshold and be able to pass.
Well, clearly the class sizes have been an issue, and then in order to mitigate the impact of the class sizes, we have been having the learners who are attending few days in a week, or there have been different permutation that we have been seen to be implemented in our schools in order to address the issue of the class sizes. So it's a matter that still will have to be experienced in the year 2021, because obviously the pandemic in itself is not going anywhere until we find the vaccine. So as far as we're concerned, the issue of the class size is going to be a contentious issue going forward, because it is not only about the issue of curriculum issue, it's also about the health and safety issue. So therefore, we need to take that into account, so that the combination is such that we must be able to assist the learners to learn in an environment that is conducive, that is safe, and therefore that addresses their mental health as well as their physical health.
Is this not also, I mean, in a sense, pointing to the failure of the system to come up with better strategies to have assisted learners during this COVID-19 crisis, that we have to resort to this particular policy?
Look, the issue of the pandemic, nobody would have planned for the pandemic. Nobody had any plans that would have really mitigated the impact of this particular pandemic. So any system of education has its own systemic problems. And clearly, in the case of a poor country or a developing country like South Africa, you are bound to have learners or schools experiencing it differently. You will not be able to compare that with Denmark, that have 15 children in a classroom, and then under normal circumstances there would have been 22 or 18, and therefore then says let's reduce that to 15. So they can afford that because the system has matured, the system has been funded. So in our case, whilst the system has been funded, we have got a legacy of apartheid that has excluded the majority of our children. So in order for us to be able to help, we have got to look at a number of alternatives and intervention, and some will not be conventional interventions, some will be, and therefore they will also being informed by the material condition obtaining. Like Basil says, look, if you are in a rural school, a school that has got a classroom, which is not a classroom, basically, we should have attended to that. However, because of the backlog of centuries where government was not building schools in rural areas and rural communities, therefore we are still seated with those particular things. 26 years of our democracy, and to address this infrastructural problem, you need to really have a focus of the government and the resources that are needed to address those particular issues. Of course, the pandemic has highlighted that, and therefore there must be a focus, but we are always going to be told there is no money to address these issues and so forth. We need to train more teachers. We need to have more assistant teachers in the classroom to also compensate or mitigate the factors of the class sizes, so that we are able to help and assist our learners. Of course, there are going to be issues of online, issues of distance learning, and all those things. They are going to be part of the permutation moving forward, because blended learning, we cannot run away from it, and then obviously the impact on the class size.
Basil, you agree with that, and the whole idea that we have limited strategies to support our learners, the view that Mugwena is forwarding of infrastructure, but also the unexpected that came with the COVID-19 crisis?
Well, hindsight is a perfect science. We can look back now and we can highlight all the things that we could have done differently. But of course, nobody planned for this. Nobody could have foreseen a year ago that this is how the world would turn out. But what we have to take away is what we must do for the time ahead of us. How do we change it? How do we plan better? And of course, it was all tied up in money. Whether it be infrastructure, whether it be technology, it is all tied up in money. But what we know we have to do is that we have to plan better, and we've got to plan for the modern world. We cannot still be stuck in the 20th century whilst the rest of the world is in the 21st. Some of our schools were there. Tragically, 90% of our schools were left behind. And now we need to look forward and do better. So it's hindsight. But I want to say we've learned a lot, and we will still learn more in the days ahead.
Does this debate highlight the need for teacher development as well, maybe more training on the side of the teachers as well?
Absolutely. Look, many of our teachers are already in training that they didn't even believe that they should be doing just a couple of months ago. Suddenly, people are interested in online work. How does this really work? Irrespective of the fact that some of our children won't be able to access it, we must be ready for it when it happens. And then, of course, teachers have suddenly seen that webinars and the like are the new way of doing professional development. And thousands of them have voluntarily joined. Our teachers have done much, much more than what the world currently gives them credit for. And they have shown that they are ready to change and learn and face the changing world. And we've got to embrace that. Now we have also got to convince government, the DBE, as well as, of course, schools themselves and parents that we need to be prepared for the next level of an intervention that is going to be very different to the chalk and talk of the past.
What work is being done, Mugwena, to that particular point? What work is being done right now? Because 2021 really is around the corner, and we will be faced with a brand new academic year and still be complaining about the fact that, well, we are still in a crisis, yet we have not planned, we have not done sufficient to say there is a new academic year coming. How are we going to support the learners?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I agree with Basil that, planning is a learning process. And in a learning process, you need to be looking at what are the desired results and what strategies you're going to be implementing. And therefore, as we continue to be engaged in the Department of Education in planning for 2021, when we're dealing with the school calendar, clearly we're taking this into account to then say, look, we have learned lessons and we have learned from the teachers that they've been very creative, they've been very innovative, they provided leadership in an environment that was really it was showing that people were helpless, others were very apprehensive about the situation. However, they were able to show us, look, education is always going to be an enabler. Education is always going to assist us to deal with the pandemic and deal with any other eventuality. So therefore, we're meeting with the Department of Education from time to time. We have got these Saturday meetings where basically we are getting reports from the Department of Basic Education in terms of the plans that are coming, and clearly we will be making our own inputs around this thing. It is only that it's unfortunate that we are working towards deep into December because of the examination. We would have loved to have all the plans ready by the end of November. However, it is the reality that we find ourselves because we can't have physical meetings, and therefore we've got to rely on virtual meetings and weekends that we're taking away from our families to ensure that the planning is in place for 2021. Clearly, it is going to be impacted by what Basil has said, that if we have got 42,000 learners who have not been placed in the school, it is going to have a big impact in terms of the first day of schooling come the end week of January, because we are opening around the end of the week of January. So therefore, the plans that we will then be unfolding and then be known by the public as soon as they are being finalized, obviously is the department's responsibility to ensure that they engage in open consultation and not do what they've been doing in 2020 of running away from consultation.
General Secretary of SADTU, Mugwena Maluleke, and NAPTOSA's Executive Director, Basil Manuel, I appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us tonight on the News Feed Late Night. We continue next and we look at the situation at our borders following an oversight visit to a number of our borders. The Democratic Alliance have concluded that the situation at our borders is worse than them just being porous. We'll find out why next.